I stared at that picture for so long I forgot to breathe. The white dress, the flowers, the joy. All of it looked perfect except for one thing. I wasn't in it. Not a single trace of the woman who raised her, paid for her dreams, or held her hand when the world was cruel. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It stopped waiting. Because when someone erases you from their story, you have two choices. You beg to be written back in, or you pick up the pen and start your own chapter. Before we begin, if stories like this touch something in you, about love, betrayal, or quiet justice, don't forget to subscribe and leave a heart for the mothers who loved too deeply and paid too silently. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own child erased you from their life? Now let's begin. It was just another quiet morning in Charleston, the kind where sunlight sneaks through the blinds and paints soft lines across the kitchen counter. Janet Ellis stood by the stove, pouring herself a cup of coffee, humming some old tune she didn't even notice anymore. The house was still, except for the low crackle of the radio she forgot to turn off last night. Her phone buzzed once, then again. She reached over lazily, wiped her hands on a towel, and unlocked the screen. And that's when everything in her chest stopped. There it was, a picture. Her daughter, Lauren, in a white dress. The kind of wedding dress Janet used to dream of buying her someday. Back when they'd sit together and talk about lace and veils like it was a promise between them. Lauren was smiling, that big, full smile Janet hadn't seen in years, standing next to a man she didn't know. His arm around her waist, his face glowing with pride. Behind them, a crowd of people. Strangers. A cake. Lights. And right under the picture, a caption. Our family is finally complete. The mug slipped from Janet's hand before she even felt her fingers let go. It hit the tile floor, shattered, and coffee spread like a slow bruise across her slippers. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just stared at that sentence, those 6 words, like they were a code she couldn't crack. Our family is finally complete. Complete. Without her. Her hand started to shake. She blinked hard once, twice, as if maybe the image would disappear. Or maybe she'd wake up and laugh about some misunderstanding. But it didn't go away. The picture stayed, shining on her screen. Proof that her daughter had built a new life. One that no longer had a place for her. Janet's throat burned. She sat down, right there on the floor, and the chair creaked beneath her as she whispered, "Oh baby girl, why didn't you call me?" Outside, the morning kept going. Birds sang. A delivery truck rumbled by. The neighbor's sprinklers hissed. The world didn't notice her breaking. She replayed every possible reason in her head. Maybe it was a last-minute wedding. Maybe there was some mix-up. Some plan to surprise her later. Maybe, but no. The caption said it plain. Our family. She wasn't part of that sentence. Janet stood up slowly, wiping her palms on her robe. She walked to the window, the same one she used to decorate with paper snowflakes when Lauren was little. Sunlight poured through, dust floating in the air. Tiny shimmering pieces of time that didn't belong to anyone anymore. She felt her chest tighten. The years of double shifts, the birthdays spent in hospital hallways, the night she prayed over bills, whispering that things would get better. All of it now felt like smoke disappearing in the light. Her phone buzzed again. More notifications. Comments. Congratulations. Hashtags. People she'd never met calling her daughter beautiful, lucky, radiant. She scrolled through them like a ghost wandering through someone else's life. There were no mentions of her name. No sign she'd ever existed. Janet pressed the phone against her chest, closed her eyes, and for a long moment, just listened to her own heartbeat. It was slow, heavy, but still there. Then quietly, she reached for the small silver cross hanging around her neck. It was old, the chain slightly tarnished, the charm worn from decades of wear. She gripped it tight, her knuckles pale. "Lord," she whispered, voice cracking. "What am I supposed to do when family forgets me?" Her words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. No echo came back. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of her breath trembling in the still air. She thought of the last time Lauren came home. Maybe 3 Christmases ago. She'd brought that same man, smiling politely, calling Janet ma'am instead of mom. The visit was short, awkward. The goodbye hug had felt more like closure than love. Still, Janet had believed there'd be more time. There's always time, she'd thought. Mothers don't lose daughters. They just wait until daughters remember. But staring at that wedding photo, she finally understood some people don't come back. Not because they can't, but because they've already rewritten the story without you in it. She walked to the sink, rinsed the broken pieces of the mug. Her movements calm, automatic. Her body remembered how to clean even when her heart forgot how to hope. When she was done, she placed the phone face down on the counter and poured herself another cup of coffee. This time she didn't add sugar. It didn't need it. The bitterness matched her mood too perfectly. Janet took a slow sip, staring out the window again. The world outside was still beautiful, golden light over the trees. A child biking down the street, laughter somewhere far off. Life had the nerve to keep going. She thought maybe this is what endings look like, not loud, not violent, just quiet, ordinary. She set the cup down and looked toward the cross again. For the first time, she didn't pray for her daughter to come back. She just said softly, keep her safe wherever she is. Then, almost as if the words were too heavy to hold, she added, and keep me strong wherever I have to go next. Her phone buzzed one last time. Another comment, another heart emoji, and she didn't look. She turned off the radio, shut the blinds halfway, and let the room dim. That morning, Janet would later say to herself, I didn't just lose my daughter. I lost my place in her world. She didn't know it yet, but that loss would be the start of something new. The moment when silence stopped being punishment and started becoming peace. People always say time flies when you're raising a child, but to me it felt like time walked slow, steady, carrying both love and exhaustion on its back. After my husband died in that factory accident, the world didn't pause for me. Bills still came. The lights still needed paying. And Lauren still needed breakfast, shoes that fit, and a mother who didn't crumble. So I learned to live in shifts. Nights at the hospital, cleaning rooms that smelled like bleach and heartbreak, days in our living room, teaching piano to the neighborhood kids who couldn't afford lessons. My hands were always tired, but my heart kept finding a reason to keep going. I remember the winter Lauren caught that awful flu. I stayed up for 3 nights straight, a wet towel on her forehead, whispering, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine," over and over, even when my voice cracked. I told her she'd be okay, even though I wasn't sure either of us would. And when she finally opened her eyes and smiled, I thought, this is what purpose feels like. There was the sweet 16 party too. She wanted a little celebration, something with friends and music. I didn't have the money, but I had a ring, my wedding ring, the only thing I'd kept from the life I lost. I sold it to rent a small room above a diner. Strung fairy lights across the ceiling myself. Watched her dance in a second-hand dress and thought, maybe love is enough to fill what money can't. That night when we came home, she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and whispered, "You're my forever home, Mama." I remember I couldn't sleep afterward. I sat by the window replaying those words, letting them wrap around me like a warm blanket. Back then I believed love worked like a savings account. You deposit kindness, patience, sacrifice, and someday when life gets hard you can withdraw a little comfort. The more you give, the safer it becomes. I never realized that some people grow up and close the account without telling you. Every photo in our house used to be proof of something real. Her first day of school, her piano recital, the time she won the spelling bee. They were pieces of a story I thought we were building together. But after seeing that wedding picture online, I looked back at those same photos, and they suddenly felt like receipts. Proof of what I gave, not of what I got back. I tried not to be bitter. I told myself maybe she just wanted a different life. Maybe she was embarrassed by my uniform, by my old car that wheezed every time I drove it. But no matter how I spun it, it always came back to the same ache. She built her world on top of everything I gave her, and she built it high enough that I could no longer reach. I can still see her handwriting in that letter she wrote when she was little. "You're my forever home." The ink has faded, the paper yellowed around the edges. I keep it tucked inside my Bible now like a prayer I don't quite know how to say anymore. Sometimes I catch myself humming "You Are My Sunshine" without realizing it. I'll be folding laundry or wiping down the kitchen counter, and suddenly, I'm back in that dim bedroom, holding her hand, believing that love like ours could never vanish. But the truth is, love doesn't vanish. It just gets stored in the quiet places waiting for a new purpose. I gave her everything I had. My strength, my laughter, my dreams. And somehow in the middle of doing that, I forgot to save a little piece for me. Now when I think about those years, the endless nights, the broken nails, the tiny victories no one saw, I don't feel regret. Just a kind of tired pride. The kind that doesn't need applause. I built her world brick by brick out of my own. And somewhere along the way, I became invisible inside it. That realization hurts, but maybe that's how every story of motherhood goes. We build the foundation, and then we step aside so they can decorate the walls. Still, when I looked at that wedding picture again, I couldn't help but whisper, all that love, all that saving, and you withdrew it without even saying goodbye. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not bitterness, just an understanding. Maybe it was time to start building something of my own again. When Lauren met Ethan Montgomery, it felt like she'd stepped into another kind of air, thinner, cleaner, expensive somehow. He was polite, handsome, and so sure of himself in that quiet way people are when they've never had to worry about money. I remember the first time she brought him over, how she seemed taller, straighter, like she'd been waiting her whole life to stand in a room next to someone like him. A few months later, I got an invitation to dinner with his family. I bought a new dress from the discount rack and borrowed a pair of shoes from my neighbor, hoping no one would notice the scuff on the side. When I arrived, their home looked like a museum, the kind where you don't breathe too loud. Crystal chandeliers, silver everywhere. A table so long it needed two people just to set it. Mrs. Montgomery greeted me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Janet, isn't it? How lovely you could join us," she said. The way someone compliments a child's drawing they'll later throw away. I sat down, folded my napkin in my lap, and tried to remember which fort came first. Ethan talked about his firm in Boston, about ski trips and summer houses. Lauren laughed at his jokes in a voice that didn't sound like hers anymore. Smoother, practiced, like she'd been rehearsing. I kept quiet, waiting for my chance to add something. When the waiter, yes, they had an actual waiter, poured the wine, Mrs. Montgomery leaned over and asked, "So Janet, what is it you do?" I told her I worked nights at the hospital. The air around the table shifted. Ethan smiled politely. Lauren's cheeks went pink. "Mama," she said later, when we were alone in the hallway, "they're refined people. Please don't talk too much about work." Just like that. Please don't talk too much about work. I smiled because that's what mothers do when their hearts break in public. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "I'll just listen." Back at the table, I set my fork down and stayed quiet while they spoke about art shows and summer galas. Things I couldn't afford to imagine. I watched Lauren talk to his mother about catering options, travel plans, and how she'd adjust to Boston life. Adjust. Like she was changing seasons, not families. At one point, Mrs. Montgomery reached across the table, patted my hand and said, "You must be so proud. You've done such well with her." The pause before "well" carried a lifetime of judgment. I nodded and said thank you, though what I wanted to say was, I didn't raise her to be well. I raised her to be kind. When dessert came, I could barely taste it. The chocolate was rich, smooth, perfect, but my tongue was dry. Every sound around me felt louder. The clink of cutlery, the low hum of conversation, the sound of laughter that didn't belong to me. On the drive home, I kept hearing her words. "Mama, they're refined people." As if refinement were something you could catch by pretending hard enough. The streetlights blurred through my windshield, and I realized something I hadn't before. It wasn't just distance that had grown between us. It was translation. Somewhere along the way, I'd started speaking a language she no longer understood. When she was a little girl, I used to tell her stories about women who built things from nothing. Women who worked, who prayed, who kept going. I thought she heard me. But now, sitting in my car outside my own house, I wasn't sure she ever did. I stared at the old piano through the window, the one I used to teach her on. Dust had settled on the keys. Maybe that's what happens when love travels too far from home. It collects silence. That night I didn't cry. I just sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my coffee cup, whispering the same question over and over. When did pride turn into shame? In every country, mothers are asked to be smaller so their children can fit into bigger worlds. We make ourselves quiet, invisible, just so they can be heard. But sitting there in that empty kitchen, I began to wonder, if you shrink too long, how much of you is left to grow back? I found out about the wedding by accident. Scrolling through my phone one evening, half awake, half numb, and there it was, another photo. This time not a casual dinner or a vacation snapshot. No, this one was wrapped in lace, flowers, and white. Lauren stood under an arch of roses, her hand in Ethan's. Her face was glowing, soft, perfect. People in the comments were crying emojis and hearts, and finally, it took me a second to understand what I was looking at, then another to realize what I wasn't. There'd been no call, no letter. No text saying, "Mama, I'm getting married." Just a caption under the picture that read, "The happiest day of my life." I waited for my name to appear somewhere in the comments. Scrolled down past friends, coworkers, strangers. Everyone had something to say. "You looked stunning. So happy for you both. Your family must be so proud." Family. That word again. I stared at it until the letters blurred together. Proud? Maybe once. Maybe I still was in some twisted way. But proud wasn't what I felt right then. It was more like erased. She didn't forget me, I whispered to the empty room. She deleted me. My hands were trembling. I set the phone down, afraid I'd drop it, afraid I'd check again. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to fill the whole kitchen. It was 11:03 p.m. somewhere across the country. My daughter had just said I do. And I wasn't even a memory in the room. I got up, turned off the lights, and walked to the little corner of the house I call my chapel. It's just a shelf, really. The small statue of the Virgin Mary, a few dried flowers, and a candle I only light when I don't know what else to do. I struck a match, cupped the flame until it caught, and whispered, "If you wanted to teach me humility, you succeeded. Now teach me peace." The candle flickered like it was listening. I sat down and let the quiet swallow me whole. I could still see the picture in my mind. The veil, the smile, the white dress glowing against the world that didn't include me. For a moment I imagined walking into that wedding uninvited, just to see if she'd meet my eyes. I pictured her turning, startled, maybe ashamed, maybe not. But then I let the thought go. There was no point in chasing a place that had already been taken away. I used to think a mother's love could outlast anything. Distance, mistakes, silence. But that night I realized love has limits too. Not in size, but in direction. You can love someone so much that you forget where you end and they begin. And when they walk away, it feels like they're taking your skin with them. I sat there for hours. The candle burned low, the wax pooling at the base, the little river of light dying slow. The house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. Somewhere outside a dog barked. Somewhere far away someone laughed. The world kept turning. I thought about the time Lauren was a child, running into my room after a nightmare. How she'd climb into my lap and whisper, "Don't let go, Mama." I never did. Not then. Not for years. But maybe I should have learned sooner that holding too tight doesn't keep anyone safe. It just keeps you trapped. When the candle finally went out, the smoke rose in a thin curl, soft and silver in the dark. I touched the cross around my neck and whispered, "Okay, Lord." If this is how the story goes, help me find the part where I'm still in it. For the first time I didn't cry. I just sat there, the quiet pressing against me like a blanket that was heavy but warm. The pain didn't vanish. It stayed steady, honest. But beneath it something else stirred. A small trembling kind of acceptance. Maybe peace doesn't come when things make sense. Maybe it starts when you stop trying to rewrite what's already been written. And that night, in the glow of that dying candle, I felt both broken and awake. Like a woman standing in the ashes of everything she built, finally realizing the fire had also given her light. The morning after felt strangely quiet, like the world had turned down its volume just for me. The coffee maker hissed softly, sunlight cut through the blinds in long thin lines, and the house, that house that used to hold laughter and piano music, felt like an echo of everything I used to be. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I once taught Lauren how to count change, how to balance her school lunch money. The wood was scratched, stained with years of life. I pulled open the drawer and found an old spiral notebook, the one where I used to write down tuition payments, grocery lists, overdue bills. Every number in it had once been about her. Every plan, every hope, every calculation had pointed in one direction, making sure she'd never struggle the way I did. But that morning I flipped to a clean page. The paper was yellowed, edges curling, but it felt new somehow. I picked up my pen, the same one I used to sign her permission slips, and wrote on the first line in big, uneven letters, "My freedom plan, September 1st. For a long moment I just stared at those words. They looked strange under my handwriting. Freedom. What a foreign idea for someone who'd built her entire life around someone else's. Then slowly I started writing. 1. Stop waiting for calls that never come. Because I had waited long enough. For birthdays, for holidays, for any excuse to hear her voice. Waiting had become my full-time job, and the silence my paycheck. No more. 2. Use the money I saved for her wedding to build my peace. That one made my hand tremble. I remembered every double shift. Every night my feet ached so badly I couldn't stand. I'd been saving that money since she was 19, hiding it in a separate account. I thought it would buy her joy, but maybe it was always meant to buy mine. 3. Find where I can bloom again. Not survive. Not manage. Bloom. Like something new could still grow out of everything that burned. When I finished writing, I closed the notebook carefully and set my rosary on top of it, right over the word freedom. The metal cross clicked against the paper. A small, perfect sound. Felt like sealing a chapter. Not erasing it, just closing the cover. I sat there for a while, breathing. The house didn't feel so heavy anymore. Maybe because I finally realized I didn't have to fill every corner of it with memories that hurt. I got up and started cleaning. Not the way I used to, not the frantic, motherly kind of cleaning where you try to fix the world by scrubbing it. This was slower, deliberate. I took the framed photos off the shelves one by one. Lauren's graduation, her prom night, the trip to Savannah where we couldn't stop laughing because the car broke down in the rain. I looked at each picture carefully before wrapping it in brown paper and placing it in the old wooden box my husband built before he died. Every photo felt like a goodbye I hadn't known how to say before. But I kept one, just one. It was small crease from years of handling. Lauren at 5 years old, missing a front tooth, frosting on her chin from her birthday cake. I slipped that picture into the notebook between the first and second pages. Not to hold on to the pain, but to remember the love that had once been pure. 'Cause love, I realized, wasn't the mistake. Holding on past its season was. As I worked, I found little reminders of the woman I used to be. Lauren's report cards, the pink ribbon from her recital dress, the crayon drawings that once hung on our fridge. I smiled at them, not with regret but with gratitude. They were proof that I had loved deeply, that I had done my part. When the house was finally quiet again, I made tea and sat back down with the notebook. The words stared up at me, steady and calm. Stop waiting. Build peace. Bloom again. I whispered them out loud like a prayer. It hit me then. Forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about remembering without bleeding. It's about letting the wound turn into something you can touch without flinching. I used to think peace was something you found when everything was fixed. But now I know it's something you build while everything's still broken. Outside, the light had shifted. Afternoon sun spilled across the floor, warm and soft. I opened the window and let the air move through the room. It carried the faint scent of jasmine from the yard, the same flowers Lauren used to pick and tuck behind my ear when she was small. I closed my eyes and smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anything. That night, I placed the notebook beside my bed, right where my alarm clock used to be. I figured if I was going to wake up to something, it might as well be hope. And as I lay down, I whispered one last line to myself. Maybe the truest thing I've ever said. I'm not just a mother. I'm a woman who finally learned how to choose herself. The day I moved into Sunhaven house, the air smelled like rain and magnolias. Savannah has this way of feeling both old and brand new at the same time, like time itself takes slower steps there. The cab pulled up to the gate, and for a second I just sat there watching the trees sway, wondering if I was really allowed to start over at 66. The building wasn't fancy. Cream-colored walls, wide porches, flower beds spilling over with pink and yellow blooms, but it felt alive. Real. I could hear laughter somewhere, faint music drifting from a garden radio. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone arriving late to a life that had already started without me. I was just arriving. The receptionist, a young man named Marcus, smiled when he saw me lugging my suitcase. "Welcome home, Mrs. Alice," he said, handing me the key. Home. The word hit me in a way I didn't expect. My room was small but bright, sunlight pouring in through sheer curtains. There was a tiny kitchenette, a wooden desk, and a balcony that overlooked the garden. I ran my fingers along the windowsill and whispered, "This'll do just fine." As I unpacked, I found the notebook, my freedom plan, tucked between my clothes. I placed it on the bedside table beside my rosary. Somehow seeing them side by side, faith and freedom, made me smile. That afternoon, I took a walk through the courtyard. The sound of birds, the smell of jasmine, the hum of people talking. It all felt like music. I passed a group of women sitting under a gazebo, knitting and gossiping like old friends. I caught bits of their conversation, grandkids, recipes, church choir, the kind of simple talk I used to overhear but never had time for. First day, one of them called out. She was small, with silver hair tied in a bun and eyes that sparkled like she already knew too much. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Just moved in." She stood up and walked over, her steps slow but sure. "I'm Mrs. Garcia," she said, holding out her hand. "From Mexico, but I've been in Savannah long enough to forget my accent, except when I'm mad." I laughed, an actual laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled and said, "Mija, God gives second lives to women who've been too busy living for others." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. But those words sank in deep like roots finding new soil. Over the next few days, I started finding my rhythm again. Mornings in the garden, trimming roses that weren't mine but felt like they could be. Afternoons in the community room, watching people play cards or paint landscapes that all looked a little too happy. In the evenings, the sound of soft jazz drifted through the halls. It was like the whole place was built out of gentleness. One morning I joined a yoga class. Me doing yoga. If Lauren could have seen that, she'd have laughed herself breathless. I wasn't good at it, not even close. My knees cracked like popcorn and I almost fell twice trying to touch my toes. But halfway through, something happened. We were told to close our eyes, take a breath and let go. And when I did, I realized I was actually doing it, letting go. The ache in my chest loosened a little. My hands stopped shaking. The air didn't feel so heavy anymore. After class, I sat on the bench by the pond, watching the light shimmer across the water. Mrs. Garcia sat next to me, sipping her tea. "You look different, Mija," she said, like someone who stopped holding her breath. I smiled. Maybe I finally exhaled. She patted my hand. Good. The world doesn't need quiet martyrs. It needs women who remember how to live. That night I made myself dinner, real dinner, not just toast and tea. I put on a record I found in the common room, something old and scratchy, and let the music fill the space. I danced a little, slow, barefoot, laughing at how silly it must have looked. But no one was watching, and maybe that was the best part. There was this moment right before bed when I stepped out onto my balcony. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting everything gold and soft. I leaned against the railing and whispered to the sky, maybe this is what heaven looks like. Not a place, but a moment when you stop apologizing for being alive. The breeze lifted my hair. Somewhere below, I heard someone singing an old Spanish lullaby. I thought of my daughter, not with anger anymore, not even with sadness, just with a quiet wish that someday she'd find her own kind of peace too. Then I turned back inside, blew out the candle on my nightstand and smiled to myself. For the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't surviving. I was living. It happened on a quiet Tuesday night. The kind where the world outside goes still and even the crickets seem to take a break. I had just finished my tea when the phone rang. For a second I didn't recognize the number, but some instincts don't fade no matter how hard you try. Picked up. Mama? Her voice cracked on that one word. People online, they're asking why you weren't at the wedding. They're saying I abandoned you. I could hear her trying to keep her breath steady, the same way she used to when she was a child caught in a lie too big for her age. For a moment I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was all right, but we weren't in those years anymore. You didn't abandon me, Lauren, I said quietly. You freed me to find myself. Silence. The kind of silence that stretches across miles, full of things neither of us could ever say. Then I heard her sniffle. Do you still love me? My throat tightened. I looked around the room, the warm light, the small plants on the windowsill, the notebook with the words "My Freedom Plan" written across its cover. I realized I didn't have to love her the same way I used to, out of habit, out of fear. But I still did. Always would. Always, I said. But love without respect is just memory. She didn't answer right away. I heard a small gasp, maybe a sob, then the faint hum of her breathing through the line. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I know, I said. But meaning and doing are different things. We both learned that, didn't we? There was another pause, softer this time. I miss you, she said. I smiled. Not the kind that stretches across your face, but the kind that lives quietly in your chest. Then maybe, I said, we can both start missing each other a little less by learning to be honest. For a long moment neither of us spoke. I could hear the ocean through her end of the line, waves crashing against a world she now called home. I don't know who I am without you, she said. That's the same thing I used to tell myself, I replied. Turns out I was wrong. You'll find your way. Just don't build it by erasing where you came from. She cried then. Not loud, not desperate. Just quiet tears like the kind you shed when you finally see something clearly. I didn't tell her to stop. Sometimes, love means letting someone cry without rushing to fix it. When the line finally went still, she whispered, I'll call again. Okay? If you do, I said gently, let it be because you want to talk, not because you feel you should. We said goodbye. Not the kind that closes doors, but the kind that lets air in through a crack. After she hung up, I sat there for a while, listening to the faint echo of her voice. Then I walked out to the balcony. The night sky was clear, the kind of clear that only comes after rain. The moon hung high, round and soft, and the breeze brushed against my cheek like forgiveness itself. I tilted my head back and whispered, thank you. I wasn't sure who I was talking to, God, the moon, maybe just the silence that had finally stopped hurting. The world felt big again, but not empty. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt found. A week after the call, the letter came. Plain white envelope, no return address. Just my name written in handwriting I knew as well as my own. I stood there for a while, turning it over in my hands, wondering whether opening it would heal something or just reopen the wound. but curiosity or maybe love always wins. The paper smelled faintly of perfume, the same one she used to steal from me when she was 16. I unfolded it carefully. Her words were neat, distant, rehearsed. She wrote that the wedding had been a difficult time, that there had been pressure from Ethan's family, that she didn't know how to include me without creating tension. She said things like, "You have to understand, Mama," and I was just trying to keep the peace. Keep the peace. It's funny how people will hurt you and call it peace. As if silence and distance were gentler than honesty. I read the whole thing twice. Then I folded it back up, placed it in the wooden box where I'd been keeping our photos, and closed the lid. I didn't cry, didn't tear it up. Some truths don't need to be destroyed. They just need to be put away. That night, while I washed the dishes, I thought about how calm I felt. Not numb calm. Like I'd finally stopped expecting the apology that would never come. Somewhere out there, Lauren was living the life she chose. And from what little I'd seen online, it wasn't quite the fairy tale she'd imagined. A few weeks later, I heard from someone, a friend of a friend, that the Montgomery family had started whispering. Apparently, her mother-in-law had scolded her in front of guests for disrespecting her elders. That same night, Ethan's old friends unfollowed her on social media. Tired of what one of them called her pretend perfection. Life has its own way of grading our choices. Sometimes the test comes long after the lesson. I didn't feel joy in hearing it. No satisfaction, no she got what she deserved. Just a quiet kind of balance, like the world had gently corrected itself without needing my anger. At Sunhaven, my days had started finding their rhythm. Morning tea in the garden, piano lessons for a few of the residents' grandkids, music-filled spaces that used to echo. One afternoon during a lesson, a little girl named Naomi stopped playing mid-song. She looked up at me, her fingers still resting on the keys, and said, "Mrs. Ellis, I wish my mom were like you." I froze. It wasn't the kind of thing you expect to hear from a child. I smiled softly and asked, "Why do you say that, sweetheart?" She shrugged. "You listen. My mom's always busy. You make it feel like the music matters." I reached over and adjusted her hand on the piano. "Does matter," I said. "So do you." After she left, I sat alone for a while staring at the piano. The light from the window spilled across the keys, and I thought, maybe motherhood doesn't end when your child stops needing you. Maybe it just finds new ways to exist. Lauren had taken my love and built a world with it, even if she'd forgotten to leave a door open for me. But this little girl, these people around me, they were proof that love doesn't disappear. It multiplies when you start giving it away again. Later that evening, I opened the wooden box one more time. The letter was still there, resting beside the old photo of Lauren as a child. I touched the edge of the paper and whispered, "You're forgiven, baby. You just don't know it yet." The moonlight reached through the window, soft and silver. I closed the box, not with sadness this time, but with gratitude. The story between us wasn't perfect, but it had taught me what every mother eventually learns. That love isn't proven by being needed. It's proven by surviving, even when it's not returned. And as I turned off the lights and the piano's last note faded into silence, I realized that maybe this peace, this gentleness, this steady heart, was the real legacy I was meant to leave behind. I was trimming the roses outside my window when I saw a familiar car pull up by the gate. For a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, the way memory sometimes does when it gets lonely. But then the door opened and there she was. Lauren. She looked different. Thinner, paler. Like someone who'd been carrying too much weight in places no one could see. I didn't move right away. Just stood there with the scissors in my hand, my heart doing that strange mix of racing and breaking all at once. She walked slowly down the path, her heels crunching on the gravel. When she finally looked up, our eyes met through the sunlight, soft, golden, almost unreal. The world around us seemed to hold its breath. "Mama," she said, her voice small, the kind you use when you're afraid the person you're talking to has stopped believing in you. "I don't know who I am anymore." I could have said 1,000 things. I could have reminded her of the hurt, the silence, the wedding she never invited me to, but what came out instead was simple. I set the scissors down, wiped my hands on my apron and said, "Then start where I did, by forgiving yourself." She just stood there, tears starting to spill, her lips trembling like the child she used to be. I walked toward her, slow and steady, until I was close enough to touch her face. And when I did, she didn't pull away. For years I'd imagined this moment, sometimes angry, sometimes desperate. But when it finally came, there was no storm, no raised voices, just the sound of the wind moving through the trees and the faint chirp of birds that didn't seem to care we were standing in the middle of an ending that felt like a beginning. She fell into my arms and I held her tight, not the way I used to when I wanted to keep her safe, but the way you hold someone who needs to remember what love feels like when it's quiet. We didn't speak for a long time. She cried against my shoulder, whispering "I'm sorry," over and over until the words lost their shape. I didn't answer. I just smoothed her hair and let her be small again for a minute. When she finally looked up, her face was blotchy, her mascara streaked. "I thought leaving you behind would make me strong," she said. I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from old pain finally turning into wisdom. "No, baby. Leaving kindness behind never makes anyone stronger." She nodded, her eyes searching mine like she was trying to find a version of me that still belonged to her. "Can we start over?" she whispered. "We already did," I said. The sun was setting behind her, the light turning everything gold. Her hair, the garden, even the dust floating between us. I thought about how many times I'd prayed for this exact day, not realizing that forgiveness doesn't come when you get what you want. Comes when you stop needing to. We walked inside together. I poured her a cup of tea the same way I always had. She took a sip, then laughed softly. "You still use too much sugar," she said. "And you still need it," I teased. For the first time in years, the silence between us didn't feel like a wall. Felt like rest. Later, when she left, she hugged me again, longer this time, the kind of hug that says I'll be back. I watched her walk toward her car, her shoulders a little lighter than when she arrived. As the sound of the engine faded, I looked out across the garden. The air was warm, filled with that soft hum of evening that always makes the world seem kinder. And in that quiet I heard it, the truth I'd been chasing all along. Forgiveness isn't a bridge you cross for others. It's the road that leads you home. 6 months later, life had softened into something simple. Not smaller, just quieter. The kind of quiet that feels earned. Janet's days began with sunlight spilling across her kitchen table, the smell of coffee, and the soft chatter of neighbors tending to their gardens outside. She taught piano 3 mornings a week at the community hall, her fingers still steady, her laughter warmer than it used to be. She'd started writing letters too, long, handwritten ones that traveled farther than she ever had. Some went to other mothers she'd met through Sunhaven, others to women she'd never met at all, whose stories somehow reached her mailbox like whispers from the world. Her words were simple. Reminders that love can survive distance, that forgiveness is a quiet kind of power. Each envelope began the same way. "To all mothers who've ever been forgotten, you are still the heartbeat of the world." And somehow those letters began to travel. Across oceans, across languages. A woman in Kenya reading hers by candlelight. Another in the Philippines tucking hers into a Bible. One in Ohio, another in Mumbai. Different faces, different hands, the same ache, the same hope. A montage of mothers filled the frame. Faces lit by morning light, hands wrinkled or young, eyes tired but still kind. Each one reading the same line in her own language, voices overlapping until it became a single steady rhythm, like a pulse shared across continents. Janet watched the video one of them made, sent back to her by email. She smiled through tears, sitting on the porch with a soft breeze lifting her hair. Around her, life hummed. Laughter from the courtyard, birds fluttering between the flowers she planted months ago. She closed her eyes. The wind caught the little silver cross around her neck, making it glint in the sunlight. For a long time she'd thought peace was something you had to wait for, a reward that came after pain, after apology. But now she knew it wasn't waiting anywhere out there. It had been here all along, hidden beneath the noise of wanting to be understood. She exhaled, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not just a mother," she said. "I'm a woman who finally chose herself." The camera lingered on her smile, soft, content, unafraid. Then it panned up toward the trees, where sunlight poured through the leaves like gold dust, and the sound of distant laughter faded into the wind. A single line appeared on the screen, written in her handwriting. "If you believe every mother deserves peace, share her story. And then, leave a heart for the women who chose dignity over silence." The music swelled, not loud, not grand, just a piano melody, tender and human. The final frame froze on Janet's face, eyes closed, the wind brushing across her skin. Stillness, not emptiness, filled the air. And for a brief, beautiful moment, it felt like the whole world was breathing with her.